Hey everybody, welcome back to the SuperBake podcast. I'm your host, Baker. Let's talk about stuff. Okay, I just have to take a few minutes just to talk about the Chiefs-Cincinnati game. I mean, I am shocked that KC won that game. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm happy. I'm ecstatic that we're going to be in the Super Bowl again. That's awesome, but I really am shocked that we won that game. I was also very surprised at how well we played, especially Mahomes with his ankle injury, because I know he had that high ankle sprain, and so I know everybody was really nervous about that going into it, especially just, with the Super Bowl not too far behind. High ankle sprains, from what I understand, that kind of injury can be pretty significant. And I think a lot of people, myself included, were nervous that he was going to make it worse if he played. But I mean, that guy's he's not gonna sit on the bench during the AFC Championship. But that was one hell of a game to watch. And both teams played pretty well for sure. But towards the end, when Mahomes had that one fumble, I think it was in the fourth quarter. I mean, I thought that was it. I legitimately thought that was the game right there. I was like, oh, okay, this is it. We're done. But yeah, then we came back and somehow pulled it off. And yeah, that was awesome. And then freaking Travis Kelce with that jabroni line. God, that dude kills me. That was so funny. Just him talking shit on I think it was the mayor of Cincinnati or something. I love that he does that on national TV. It's like when they won that last Super Bowl and he dropped the F-bomb on live TV. That was so funny. I love the memes coming out about him and Mahomes. One of them's it's Mahomes is he's Kermit trying to do an interview, and then Travis Kelce is Animal just jumping in there and just interrupting him and stuff. It's it's like Mahomes is just trying to get through one interview before Kelce comes in and just wrecks everything for him. So that cracks me up. Yeah, that guy, he's a knucklehead, but he's a cool guy though. I like Kelce a lot. Yeah, I'm definitely excited to watch them in the Super Bowl for sure, even though I know I said this about the last game, but I really don't think we're going to beat Philadelphia. I don't see that happening. I mean, I would be ecstatic if we did, but I don't know. I just think they're the better team. I feel like we've pulled together pretty nicely the last few weeks, but man, the second half of the season, it just felt like the Chiefs were just so inconsistent out there. So, of course, I'll be watching and rooting for them and having heart palpitations watching the game, I'm sure. But yeah, it's gonna be exciting regardless. I'm happy to see us back in the Super Bowl again, the third time in the last 6 years. So yeah, it's awesome. As somebody who had a football team that was, not very good not that long ago, it's nice to see the Chiefs finally, coming into their own and actually becoming a pretty formidable force out there. Exciting times for us, I guess. Hopefully they don't get their asses kicked too hard in the Super Bowl. I know the last one we played, we were against the Bucs, I think, and we didn't even score a single touchdown, and that was tough to watch. Hopefully this won't be a repeat of that. All right, well, on to the actual topic of the episode. So talking about episodes 8 and 9 of House of the Dragon. Episode 8 titled The Lord of the Tides, and episode 9 titled The Green Council. So I'll kind of be talking about both of them together, and I'll discuss specific scenes in them as well. Last time I kind of talked about each episode individually. This time I think I'll kind of talk about them more together, just to kind of blend it a little bit more if I can. And I'll probably do that more often as I talk about shows. But and these two, we got another time skip in the show, which was kind of interesting since we had a time skip 2 episodes before, in episode 6 or 5 or 6. I can't remember which one it was. So yeah, this was, I think 6 years, jumping ahead a little bit. So we see Rhaenyra and Alicent's kids are much older, and again, played by different actors and actresses. So one thing I wanted to note about these 2 episodes that I thought was very interesting was Alicent's character. I think these were probably her 2 best episodes in the entire show. The actress that plays Alicent, whose name I cannot remember, I know I had it written down somewhere, but I can't remember what it was, but she really, I think, knocks it out of the park with these 2 episodes. These definitely feel like they focus more on her and kind of her relationship with her kids, as well as her relationship with her father Otto, and I thought that was a nice touch. I didn't feel like we got too much of that previously in the season, especially when she was younger and we saw her, with her relationship blossoming with King Viserys. So it's nice that she got more of that out of these 2 episodes. So I really liked that. Especially in episode 9. Episode 9, she really, I think, the actress really gets a chance to really kind of show her chops, and it's very impressive to see. One thing I definitely want to note in this, and especially in episode 8, is like how their kids, Alicent and Rhaenyra's kids, definitely feel like they're becoming their own characters. Especially the characters Aegon and Aemond. I hope I'm saying their names right. I'm probably butchering them. Aemond especially. He's the one that gets his eye cut out by Rhaenyra's 2 sons. The actor that got to play him, I just want to go ahead and note that, man, he's a creepy looking guy. I think they made him look like that on purpose. I'm sure the eye patch doesn't really help much, but he practically screams villain. He definitely looks like the kind of guy that would be riding around in a giant dragon burning down villages. The Lord of the Tides, we see that this episode basically picks up with we see more of Viserys. It looks like his leprosy is really gotten worse. Like he's basically on like the verge of death, essentially. Like that's one thing I want to say about these 2 episodes is like King Viserys looks terrible in these episodes. Like we've seen him progressively get worse as the season has gone on, and like from starting on episode 8 onward, like he just basically looks like he's about ready to just kick the bucket. Like his skin's rotting away. We see like the part of his face is basically covered up with bandages, and he wears like a mask to cover it up and stuff, which we find out why later on. And it's pretty gross when they finally do reveal like, what his face looks like under the mask. That was one thing I definitely wanted to note too. Like I would definitely recommend not eating if you watch this episode, particularly the scenes with Viserys. They really do a good job of making him look like he's falling apart. I assume there was a fair amount of CGI used on his character, but it looks like they also used some makeup too to make the actor Paddy Considine look like that. So I have to give kudos to the makeup and special effects team on that one. He definitely looks like death, pretty much. We see, because of his illness, we see Alicent she's kind of more in charge of King's Landing. Like she basically kind of takes care of everything in his stead, with her father Otto kind of working behind the scenes as well. We see also a lot more of Alicent interacting with her kids. There's a scene where she has to discipline her son Aegon II because he assaults a servant girl, which, we see a really tense conversation between Alicent and that girl later on in the episode. We also get to see her bitch slap Aegon, and gives him some pretty harsh criticism because of that. She definitely is a lot more commanding in this episode, which I really liked. I liked seeing her character take more charge in episode 8. And of course, like I said before, her other son, Aemon Targaryen, he gets much more of a bigger role in this episode. Even though the actor I said who plays Aemon is kind of creepy looking, he does still look pretty cool, and I think he actually does a pretty good job in this episode as well. I like the way he portrays the character, so I find myself, I didn't care about the kids too much in the previous episodes, but with the older actors portraying them, I think they're definitely getting a lot more interesting, for sure. We also get to see a nice little throwback to the original Game of Thrones series, where we see when Alicent's having a conversation with Viserys, he actually references the Song of Ice and Fire legend about the prince that was promised. Granted, he's kind of he's not very lucid when he talks about it. We see throughout the episode that he's on Milk of the Poppy, and he seems very out of it throughout most of the time. So it's, you don't really know how much of it is him, thinking clearly, and how much of it is him just, because he's so hopped up on, that poppy stuff, like how much of him is just, hallucinating. There's a lot more of that Game of Thrones sneaking around stuff going on in this episode, where we see Alicent and Otto are trying to get their kids set up in a better position to take over King's Landing instead of Rhaenyra, who's basically been promised as the heir to the throne after Viserys' death. So there's a huge thing in the scene where the story where they're trying to decide who the next Lord of the Driftmark's going to be. So that leads to this big kind of like court hearing essentially with like Viserys at the Iron Throne. One thing I wanted to note in this episode too is whenever they show the Iron Throne, and granted, I know this is supposed to be before Game of Thrones, but there's a lot more swords on the ground. Whereas in Game of Thrones, we see the Iron Throne there's much fewer. Like here, they're all scattered all over the place. I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't know if that's supposed to. I don't know if maybe that's just supposed to be like some kind of symbol that the Iron Throne was much greater than it is now, like when we watch it during the events of the Game of Thrones series. But I just kind of find that interesting. I feel like it was probably like that throughout the entire season. Maybe I just didn't pay that much attention to it. But yeah, that was cool. And then we get to see Viserys showing up in the courtroom, which I thought was funny. I got the impression throughout the entire episode that like Otto and the others were purposely giving him milk of the poppy to try to keep him subdued so he couldn't make any major decisions, which would be, I mean, it seemed like something that would be in line with what Otto was doing. I don't think Alicent was doing it. She actually genuinely seems like she is concerned about him and that she doesn't want him to suffer. So that was kind of the impression I got from her. I don't think of her as a schemer. I actually do think of her as like she just seems like she's trying to do like the right thing, you know, with what she has, you know. So that's kind of the impression I get from her. But that scene where Viserys actually like walks into the throne room, you know, much to the dismay of Otto, that was a cool scene. Like we see him, he's clearly struggling to get up the steps, and there's a nice little touching scene between him and Daemon where Daemon actually helps him up to the throne, which is I think that was a nice moment for their characters, given like the rocky start that we saw them in the beginning of the season for sure. So I like that scene a lot. And I like that he reaffirms Rhaenyra and her children as his successors. We see there is like a pretty almost kind of comical, tense moment in the scene where let me see, I had the notes on here. Let's see. Yeah, Vaemond, that was his name. I couldn't remember the character's name. Vaemond, who is the brother of the original, the current Lord of the Driftwood, or Driftmark. He thinks that he should be the successor, and he calls Rhaenyra's sons bastards, which leads to a almost funny moment where Daemon cuts off like half of his head in a really gruesome scene. I like the comedy there. I like Matt Smith. That dude knows how to deliver lines. Like I like when after Vaemond says that, Viserys says that he'll have his tongue for saying that, and then Daemon just cuts off half his head, and he's like, he can keep his tongue. And of course, they have to show his tongue actually sticking out, which was like, it was so disgusting, but it was actually a really funny scene. Yeah, that Matt Smith, man, that guy, like I've said this before about him, he is definitely becoming one of my favorite actors right now. Like, I think he has such a cockiness that you can't help but love, like that he brings to each of his roles. I think he was definitely born to play Daemon Targaryen, so I loved him in this episode. And then, of course, the big spoiler, of course, for the episode, we actually see in the very last scene, it's actually kind of sad, we see Viserys appears to die in his sleep towards the very end of the episode. So it was sad to see that character go, and especially from Paddy Considine, you know, he definitely brought a lot to this part, and I liked him as that character, so it was sad to see him go. And then, of course, before he dies, we see Viserys whispers to Alicent that he wants his son Aegon to inherit the throne, which, of course, I'm assuming the writers purposely left ambiguous because there's two Aegons. I think Rhaenyra, one of her sons, is named Aegon, and then Alicent, her son, is Aegon II. And, of course, Viserys doesn't specify which one. It's like, dude, you couldn't at least be a little more specific before you die? Come on, dude. Be a team player. But yeah, then that kind of leads in episode 9, which we get to see even more of like that Game of Thrones, you know, scheming and sneaking around that we've come to know from the series. One thing that I liked about episode 9 is I like how when Alicent talks to Otto about what Viserys told her, he immediately calls a meeting with the council, and it turns out that they've been planning for this the entire time. Like they've been essentially planning on trying to figure out how to get her son on the Iron Throne, which I thought was really... It was almost kind of funny. It's like, okay, yeah, these guys have clearly been trying to sneak around for a long time. They've had this figured out. So we get a tense little conversation between Alicent and the council. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying before, where it feels like Alicent is trying to do the right thing. Like, it doesn't seem like she's trying to sneak around and trying to screw over Rhaenyra and her family. It seems like she really is trying to do the right thing. And we see this in this scene where she actually appears taken aback by the fact that her father and the council have been planning for this. And also, too, we see Kristen Cole, who looks like he's kind of getting a little bit, a little unstable in this scene. And we see him, he kills Lord Beesbury because Beesbury is the only guy who actually speaks against the decision to try to put Aegon II on the throne, and he smashes his face into the table. Damn, Kristen, that dude's like cold. But we see Commander Westerling, who again played by the voice actor who played Dracula from Castlevania, whose name I also can't remember. I should have written that down, but he quits like a boss, so that was cool. Basically says, he serves the king and there is no king, so he has his little confrontation with Kristen, but like he gets to quit and just leaves, and that was a cool little scene too. I assume we're going to see more of him later on in the season. We've only got like one episode left after this, so I guess we'll find out. I have a feeling he's going to have a bigger role down the road, though. We see basically there's a huge scramble later in the episode where they're trying to find Aegon II because he disappears randomly, and so now they're all trying to find him. Alicent wants to find him so she can talk to him about ruling the throne, and Otto wants to find him because he's Otto and he's got his own sneaky agenda. So it leads to some pretty interesting confrontations where there's two different groups basically trying to find him. And one thing that I found particularly interesting about this was Otto's character, who has been, I would almost consider him like, I've kind of thought of Otto as sort of like a cross between like Tywin Lannister and I guess maybe Varys, or no, Littlefinger, like a cross between Tywin Lannister and Littlefinger from Game of Thrones. Like he almost kind of has like a leader's charisma like Tywin has, but he's got this sneaky underhandedness that Littlefinger has. And of course, Rhys Ifans, I think, plays the part, incredibly well. I think he's definitely one of the standout performances of the show. I like Otto's character in the sense that he's such a slimy, sneaky character, but I'm not quite sure yet if he has the same caliber that Tywin or Littlefinger had, at least from the earlier seasons of Game of Thrones. But assuming he's going to be in the second season, I haven't watched episode 10 yet. I'm going to kind of reserve judgment on that. But I like the scenes with him, and especially the scenes with him and Alicent. We get another pretty big scene with those two in this one where we see Alicent actually stand her ground against her father Otto, and that was a cool scene. That was, again, another one of my highlight scenes from these two episodes with Alicent's character, where we really see her come into her own and kind of stand on her own 2 feet. It kind of makes you wonder if, like, the fact that her husband's been sick and dying from his condition all these years has kind of forced her to take on a stronger role for herself and for her children in King's Landing. It's an interesting dynamic that I think really adds to the story, especially since in the beginning she seems so kind of small and weak, especially compared to her father, who seems to have such a commanding presence over her, which again kind of reminds me of the relationship between Tywin and Cersei from Game of Thrones. So it's really cool to see this character really kind of blossoming into at least what appears to be a better character, morally speaking, than Cersei was. Cersei, of course, being, seditiously evil, especially towards the end of the series. One scene in the episode that really kind of got me was when we see Alicent talking to Larys Strong, Clubfoot. And because he's kind of like Varys from Game of Thrones, where he's like this guy who seems to have like these connections across the city. He kind of works with all these different people who kind of give him information and stuff. And the dude just seems to know all the shit that's going on in King's Landing. Like, the guy's connected. And God, is he a fucking creep. That scene with him and Alicent towards the end where he starts doing something pretty inappropriate while he looks at her feet. It's like, oh my God. It's like, I already knew the dude was creepy from the previous episodes, but this one pretty much just cemented it. Like, okay, get the fuck out of here, you fucking creep. But yeah, that's I don't know how I feel about his character. He's different for sure. And then we get to see the episode ends with Aegon about to be named king when we see Princess Rhaenys, I think that's how you say her name. She shows up on a dragon, the dragon Melis. And there's a really cool scene where it looks like she's going to have the dragon go all Dracarys on their asses, but of course she doesn't, and she just chooses to fly off instead like a boss. And I mean, of course, I knew that wasn't going to happen because Alicent's there. Like, these are all a lot of the main characters. So, yeah, I assume they're going to be in the second season. I don't know. I just had a feeling that wasn't going to happen. And then she just kind of flies off, and that's where it ends. And it kind of leads into episode 10. So I'm definitely curious to see how that's going to play out. I think that's going to be very interesting going into the season finale. So far, though, I mean, yeah, like 9 episodes in, almost done with the season, and yeah, it's definitely got me for sure. One thing I want to note about this series for sure over Rings of Power, and again, I hate to pick on that show so much, but it's hard not to draw comparisons between them, is that I find the characters in this show genuinely way more interesting. Like, Alicent as a character, to me, I found way more interesting than Galadriel from Rings of Power. Like, these 2 episodes, she's really shined as a standout character of the show. And of course, I like Rhaenyra. I like Daemon. Daemon, Otto, and Alicent, I think, are my favorite characters in these last probably a handful of episodes for sure. And I think this show definitely has some great, compelling, well-written characters in it that I think makes it stand out over Rings of Power. So yeah, I'm genuinely excited going into episode 10. Hopefully it will, manage to stick the landing. I'll give more of my thoughts on that once I get to that episode. So next, I just wanted to discuss just quickly some of the developments with E3 for 2023. I saw an article recently saying that the big players, Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo, are all three reportedly not going to be attending E3 this year. Which that was kind of surprising that all three of them weren't going to be there. Not so much with Sony, because I know that Sony, I think, has skipped out on E3 for the last 2 years or so. It seems like the last few years, I think. But it seems like ever since the pandemic happened, E3 is definitely, they've gone downhill. I mean, I'm going to be perfectly honest. I've never paid that much attention to E3 unless I knew they were going to be talking about a major game that I was genuinely interested in. I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it. But this has a lot of buzz going on. So far, there's no comment from any of the companies as far as, why they're not going, or what their plans are, during E3 or post E3. So I'll be curious to see if we get any comments from, executives from any of those three companies. But yeah, that's definitely going to be interesting for sure. One thing that I'm wondering about is E3, if it's even going to still happen. I have no idea. I mean, I guess you would have maybe some smaller video game studios and developers there talking about their products coming out, but I mean, those three really are kind of they kind of are E3. They're the big names there. They're kind of what draw in a lot of crowds, so that's interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of speculation from fans out there too, like whether or not E3 is even going to happen. As far as I'm aware, I think it is still going to happen. I think it's in June, I believe, but yeah, like as far as I'm aware, like there's no plans to cancel it. At least I can't find anything about that as of this podcast. But I'll be curious about that. Like, I didn't really pay attention to E3 last year. I did pay attention to like Nintendo Direct, and I'm probably going to pay more attention to those as time goes on and kind of give my thoughts on those, like Nintendo Direct, Sony, and Microsoft announcements. But I'll probably pay attention to E3 and just kind of see how things go from there. It does seem like now there seems to be more of an incentive for these video game developers and these big companies to kind of have their own sort of just like launch shows or whatever, or talking points about games that are coming out that they're going to be releasing in the near future. So maybe they're kind of moving towards that. I mean, if that's the case, I think that seems like a more appropriate format anyway. I mean, I know a lot of people still tune into E3 and they like watching it, but yeah, without all three of them there, it's going to be very interesting how this plays out. It also makes me wonder, like, since Sony's made a habit of not going in the past, I wonder how often now we're going to see all three of them skipping out on E3 moving forward. Like, if it happens this year, maybe they could survive, but, if it continues to happen, like if it happens in 2024 and 25 onward, I don't know how that's going to look. But I think I've read somewhere too that like attendance at E3 has also kind of dropped in the last couple of years as well. But for me personally, this isn't that big of a deal. I just thought it was interesting and just wanted to kind of bring that up real quick. But yeah, I think I'll be tuning into E3 to kind of see how it plays out. Again, if it does, in fact, still happen. But yeah, I'll also be kind of looking for any individual statements or updates from those three individual gaming companies. But yeah, I mean that's an interesting development for sure. Hopefully not bad news for E3, but time will tell. All right, guys. Well, I think that's going to conclude today's episode. Once again, I am on Anchor, Spotify, and YouTube. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time. Later.